Thanks, Emily. Given its climate and topography, North Carolina is a state filled with lakes, rivers, and streams. Still, water is a finite natural resource that must be balanced among industrial, agricultural, residential, and recreational uses. And given the state's rapidly growing population, water and wastewater resources are expected to be in even greater demand in the years ahead. Good morning, you guys. I'm Ryan Nance with North Carolina's Electric Cooperatives here in Raleigh. Along with Josh Hollings, we co-chair NCEDA's Professional Development Committee and have the honor of welcoming everyone to today's event and introducing some presenters. Late last year, y'all know we launched this three-part webinar series we're calling Utilities 101. We've brought in experts on electric power and gas-based energy. Today's focus is on water and wastewater. Like other utility resources, businesses and people expect water to be clean, affordable, and available on demand. We've organized the last in our series to address these issues, which apply to communities, companies, and industries throughout the state. Before we turn to today's expert panel, let's take a minute and thank our annual sponsors, without whose generosity, professional development offerings like this one just wouldn't be possible. Emily right now is scrolling through the different names and logos across your screen. Please take a careful look at these and certainly join me in thanking them. We want our sponsors to know how grateful NCEDA members are for their continued confidence and support. They've been more important this year than ever before. Found a cool feature on Microsoft Teams yesterday where you could do this little virtual applause thing where clapping hands come out across the screen. I don't think we have that here, but I know the sponsors can feel us. All right, guys, water has been a key economic development resource in North Carolina since our earliest times, keeping farmlands fertile and driving grain mills and textile looms. Today, water is vital to industries as divergent as biomanufacturing and data centers. We're joined by a panel of professionals who are knowledgeable about the infrastructure considerations, funding programs, technical services, and other issues related to the role water and wastewater plays in our contemporary economic development landscape. We'll start, I think we can go alphabetical here. Melanie Adams, a familiar name for many of you. She serves as the Director of Rural Grants Program for the Department of Commerce. She and her team manage $12 million per year portfolio grant programs, including building reuse, infrastructure, and demolition programs designed to encourage redevelopment, create jobs, and increase economic investment in rural North Carolina. Next, Irina Kristanovich, Economic Development Director for the town of Holly Springs. Irina was an integral component of the project team during the recruitment of Novartis vaccines, today known as Seqirus, to the Holly Springs Business Park with over $1 billion in capital investment. During her time with the town, Irina's worked with the state to certify 3 industrial parks, which total over 700 acres of land designed for the town's economic development efforts. Really impressive there. All right, next, Will Larson served as project manager at the Wooten Company since 2010. Since then, he's worked with both the Raleigh and Greenville teams on projects covering all aspects of municipal infrastructure. His experience with local governments allows his teams greater insight into potential challenges and solutions, improving relationships and making for more efficient project designs. Rounding up the last 2, we've got John Risgard. He's the State Revolving Funds Section Chief within the Division of Water Infrastructure at the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ. John has more than 15 years of experience working for DEQ, where he's spent the majority of his career supporting wastewater utilities. And finally, Ms. Katie Stembers, the Associate Director for the Life Science Economic Development at North Carolina's Biotechnology Center. She's responsible for supporting efforts to create, manage, and measure programs leveraging North Carolina's technology-based assets to attract and retain life science jobs and investments. Really excited about this full slate of panelists, guys, and we're going to start with Will. Will Larson is coming in from the Wooten Company and has the kind of monumental task that we put on Big Dog Bill Roberts in Electric 101. and others for gas, but to kind of lay the groundwork and get us at least a high level technical 101 of our water and wastewater infrastructure. So I'm going to turn it over to Will. And unlike the previous formats, guys, I'm going to kind of sit back a little bit and interject less and let the experts really do the talking here. So with that said, Will, if you want to step on in and take over for us, man.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Good morning to all. It's a pleasure to be with you. And for those that may not know, this is National Engineers Week. So of all weeks for this topic to come up, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to lend our services and our experience to the group and share in the development of North Carolina, particularly with economic development through water, wastewater infrastructure. For those that are not as familiar with the Wooten Company, we are an 85-year-old firm. We have 5 offices spread across North and South Carolina. We represent about 100 full-time employees, and we offer several different disciplines of service. We can certainly talk more and showcase more of our experience as we go, but let's go ahead and dive in. Going into today's session, certainly we do not expect everyone to walk out of here as a technical expert, but the goal is for an increase of exposure and hopefully an increase of knowledge as your takeaway from the panelists today. A couple of the key considerations that we have found through our tenure of experience really relate around the general topic of communication. As economic developers and as skilled tradespeople within our industry, we have all seen the scoping requests come in that we have a potential industry or a potential tenant coming to our site or our general area. Their first couple questions are, how much can you give me and how fast can I get it? It's our job as the developers, as the engineers, as the stakeholders representing the owner and the citizens to determine the answers and the how-tos for those questions. One of the most important topics that we can relate and provide to the group at large in our experience is the ability to identify a development team. That includes not only the economic developers, it includes your local public works staff, your local elected officials. We highly encourage you to start engaging the technical expertise through engineers and planners, and really start to create an environment that frequent and open communication equals faster and more efficient responsiveness to these potential industries and to these potential commercial targets. When we're going into particularly industrial park settings, tailoring some of that master planning, tailoring some of the park's features for some flexibility lends itself to not only you as the developer providing more options, but also creating a little bit more of a redundancy and a little bit more of a welcoming approach for these potential industries. We'll really start diving in to that fourth bullet, planning for water in, sewer out. And then towards the second and the third parts of today's presentation, we'll get into some of the case studies and the financial commitments, which, as we all know, may be the most difficult parts of the economic development and the planning. Next slide, please. First, we'll dive into the water in topic. As you are well aware, water is one of our most valuable resources in North Carolina, as well as a civilization. The availability of supply can come from several different factors in several different locations, depending on your specific region of the state, depending on your particular site conditions. Generally speaking, water comes from either on-site supplies, such as groundwater wells, or it can come from more of a surface water, municipal or regional type setting. There's many factors that go into the determination of availability. As as far as the average use, the peak demand, the chemistry factors, and all those different topics and situations are really best discussed with technical-minded and technical educated resources such as engineers or groundwater specialists. Within a particular system, there's also different assets that are critical to have identified early in the planning stage. As I mentioned, the first question that we generally see is how much can we offer, how close is it, and how quickly can we get it to them if we don't have it in place. Knowing your distribution system assets, that being your elevated tanks or your groundwater storage tanks, the proximity of any type of supplies or booster pump stations, knowing the general layout and availability of your distribution system, such as your fire hydrants, your transmission mains, all those play into, again, that critical responsiveness to the potential industries. One of the things that we also see quite frequently is based on the type of industry or the type of commercial client is questions surrounding particular water chemistry. And by water chemistry, what I mean is certain factors that make your water unique to your given region. That could be the pH of your water. That could be the water hardness. Certainly across the state of North Carolina, we have different levels and scales of this. The eastern side of the state being the coastal plain, all the way to the western side of the state being the mountain region. Every region represents a different chemical makeup of that, not only raw water supply, but even your finished water that you're able to provide to your end users. One of the other things that plays into that is the particular disinfectants that your on-site wells or that your municipal supplier can provide to your site. If we go to the next slide, what you'll see is just a very basic schematic of a traditional water system. And a couple of things to point out here are the multiple sources or potentials for groundwater or surface water supply. Everything has to be treated to a potable or at a minimum a reuse standard. And then it goes into temporary storage. And that can, again, go from elevated storage tanks, groundwater storage tanks. There's developing research and industry practice of aquifer storage. And so it really lends itself to many different options based on your specific conditions. The one critical piece that I would like to point out here in that larger picture on the right-hand side, you'll see a grid pattern. And what that represents in this scenario and is best applied towards all water distribution systems is the element of redundancy. We all know that time equals money, particularly when you're talking commercial and industrial clients. To have your distribution system and your supply be interrupted for a given reason, whether that be a scheduled maintenance event, whether that be an emergency repair, really starts to hinder your client's ability to meet their demands. So going ahead and planning for elements of redundancy, either through specific delivery of water, specific supply of water, extended high pressure, all of those different factors really elevate your position in the eyes of all these potential industries and potential clients. On the right-hand side of the page, what you'll see are a couple of different images, one being a surface water treatment plant. This particular instance is located in Martin County. And then the image on the bottom right starts to lend itself to some of the more particular discussions or the particular components and factors with respect to asset placement. The location of your elevated tank in respect to not only your industrial demand, but also your residential and your small commercial plays very highly on the redundancy and the predictability of your system. We'll shift gears here as we head to our next slide, and now we'll start focusing a little bit on our wastewater elements. Generally speaking, our wastewater can be divided into a couple different subcategories, one being the collection of wastewater. Then we start moving into the transmission of that collected wastewater to its ultimate treatment location. Within the collection of wastewater, I think that we're all relatively familiar with gravity sewer systems. Water always tends to flow down gradient. Most of the time that equals downhill. The gravity sewer systems lend on that principle that has been here since the age of time and is really geared towards working with the existing topography of your site to move water and to move this waste product without the mechanical means of a pumping system. In locations and situations where this hydraulic or passive transmission of water is not available, energy has to be interjected into the system. This most commonly comes from a type of pump situation, pump stations or low pressure or high pressure collection. As the wastewater is transmitted away from the site into your treatment destination, that is really where development of your development team and your local factors, your local public works and your treatment plant staff is very critical. Every single treatment plant across the state has unique abilities to treat wastewater and to treat it to different levels. Having some gauge of that going into a project assists you in your job and your team in their ability to answer the questions and meet the demands of existing industry for existing demand. If you have those existing clients that want to expand or add service lines, as well as attract new industry and new customers. That lends itself into the system capacity, knowing what your average flows are, any type of peak flows or peak demands that are being requested from your clients and these potential industries, as well as what their plans are long-term. Just because they're producing X amount of gallons today, do they have envisions or goals to proceed on to more of a build-out flow? We'll touch on pre-treatment here. This is certainly an ever-evolving topic, but again, leaning on your relationship with your local treatment professionals, your engineering professionals, you can dictate and determine if industries classify as significant industrial users. There's several different categories that may trigger that. And then how that plays into the responsibility of treating the wastewater, whether it be on site prior to collection, or once it's had the opportunity to go to the regional treatment station. If we go to our next slide, what you'll see is a very similar setup to the water system, but now reversed for the collection of wastewater. Now that we're moving away from distributing finished water, now the water is contaminated and we've returned it back into a collection effort. Mentioning working with that topography, you can start to see how gravity is implemented against pressure situations such as the force main. We'll go ahead and move to our next slide now, which is probably one of the highest questions or most frequent questions that you get asked is, what does the cost look like? Now, these are very rule of thumb cost. Generally speaking, elevated tanks are about $1 per gallon of elevated storage. Distribution lines and then collection lines range anywhere from $5 to $30 per inch foot. And then pump stations, we threw in kind of a minimum cost, but all of these are very dependent on not only your particular region in the state, the scope of your project, and then what time constraints are placed on the construction of these. We'll go on to the next slide, and I'll mention that one of the most recent examples that we have done as the Wooten Company is the mega site, the Kingsborough mega site in Edgecombe County. I think this has been well documented in publications across the state, and if there's time at the end, we'll be happy to circle back to this and answer any questions on the particular of this. But as we move on to my final slide here, Again, we are the Wooten Company, happy to lend services to anybody that's interested to answer questions or extend our history of experience and expertise.
Well, that's perfect. And it wouldn't expected anything less from a good Wolfpacker right there. Guys, y'all heard it. Really hard to cover everything in just barely 15 minutes, which flew by. As Emily mentioned earlier, we always do a follow-up email that'll have additional links to resources folks can dive in, but certainly remind everybody, you've got the Q&A box right there. Drop your questions. Don't be shy. But with that, we're going to transition to Act 2 right here to Katie and Irina. And so you kind of got a little technical baseline right there. Irina and Katie will be able to step in and talk and give some color on, real life economic development practitioner and working deals. And I think a lot of you guys on the call today are familiar with the success they've had in Holly Springs. So with that said, I'll let Katie and Irina take it away.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And, thank you to NCEDA for having this great presentation on an important topic and for inviting me to participate. Today, Irina and I are going to focus specifically on life sciences because there's so much activity in North Carolina right now. And while some of the specific challenges may be a little bit different for different industries, I think the lessons learned apply across the board. So just keep that in mind. But since we're talking about life sciences today, I just want to mention that as hopefully you all know, North Carolina is a leader in life sciences. We've got more than 775 life science companies in North Carolina that employ more than 67,000 people in the state. And a big and rapidly growing portion of those companies are focused on biopharma manufacturing. And so, within the life sciences, there's different types of companies that are going to have different kinds of water and wastewater needs. But I think both from my experience and from Irina's experience, the biopharma manufacturing companies specifically have the most unique challenges, specifically in the wastewater space. In the projects that I've seen, water itself and access to the quantities of water they need is often not a challenge for municipalities, but the wastewater is. And part of that is because we are such a leader in this space. We have the highest concentration of the highest number of biopharma manufacturing companies and employees of any state in the US. And unfortunately for us, many of those companies are located in places that have nutrient sensitive waters, which means much more stringent regulations for the types of constituents in the wastewater that can be discharged. And so what this means is that there are things that companies have to consider in North Carolina that they may not have to consider in other locations. For example, in Massachusetts, there's a massive ocean very close to Boston, which mitigates a lot of their wastewater challenges, whereas most of our discharge is going into the various river systems in central North Carolina. So what that ends up meaning is that many of these companies need to pre-treat their wastewater before it goes to the municipality. But because, again, they don't have to do this at some other locations, that conversation it needs to happen really early. And the way we've seen this work the best is when the local economic developers get the local municipality involved early in these conversations. When a company is first looking at a site, having that conversation of what is in your wastewater, at what concentration, how often, because there's even within biopharma manufacturing, there's a huge range of what their challenges are. Some companies have a high nitrogen that needs to be pre-treated before they can discharge the water. Other companies that are using single-use facilities may have a super high ethanol concentration because they use so low flow, because they're not cleaning in the traditional way. So again, there's there's some challenges here that need to be met head on. So I'm gonna turn it over to Irina to give a more specific example. But again, if there's one takeaway from this, it's to have that conversation super early in the process. Even if the company's not thinking about that at that stage, it'll save a lot of headaches early on if you can talk about what the wastewater is, whether or not they'll need to pre-treat, so that it doesn't become a problem later down the line during the economic development process.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Ryan, and the whole NCDA team for having us here today. Great discussion. It's really a pleasure to be here and part of this panel. I would ask Emily to please share. I just have one slide that I wanted to share with the audience today. That kind of, you will see some points that Will has certainly mentioned a few times, words like capacity and the redundancy and the peak usage. So this slide will give you the current state of the water and wastewater capacity in Holly Springs. And as the economic developer on the local level, honestly, Will, I wish everyone can, in state of North Carolina can hear your presentation and just kind of taking those high points, or what do we really need to know, being in the shoes of the local economic developer when we are meeting face to face with our clients, and to truly understand the questions that they're asking, as Katie pointed early on, and be able to give them those answers, and as well understanding the industry standards and what are they really looking early on in the process. So for example, I'll just give a brief snapshot of the situation in Holly Springs. Right now, Holly Springs has a capacity about 12 million gallons a day. And you can see that our average daily usage is only 2.5 million. Holly Springs has a high redundancy in our water supply. We actually get our water from 3 points. The most we get from the south, from the Harnett County, and the Harnett County water plant is located next to the Cape Fear River. We also have access to the Jordan Lake, to the town of Cary, as well as the town of Apex. Of course, this is very important to our clients when we talk about the redundancy and capacity in the water supply. Reclaimed water is also an extremely important factor. Holly Springs has one of the most robust reclaimed water systems in the state of North Carolina. And we are proud to say that with using the reclaimed water system, we are able to save about 12% of the daily potable water in our community. This is used for irrigation for the industrial processes. Currently, as you can imagine, the highest user of the reclaimed water in Holly Springs is actually Securus, which is our largest employer as well. And then, there is a discussion that Katie mentioned. It's probably one of the most asked, is the wastewater and understanding what the industry needs are. We are lucky that at the time, and Novartis, today Securus, came to the Holly Springs. They have decided and invested significant capital to actually pre-treat at the site and discharged, to our plant, pre-treated very low levels of the discharge, to the wastewater plant. Since then, we have really tried to deeply understand the industry needs. We have met with numerous times with the biotech staff to really understand what can we expect as we try to position Holly Springs to be in the position to truly win these projects. And we don't need to go deep into the understanding exactly every chemicals that come to that, but as you're meeting with the clients, it's really good to understand what is the capacity of your wastewater plant in your community to be able to allocate these type of chemicals in discharge. What is the level of the BOD, COD that your treatment, human plant can actually take, and pre-treat and treat, without the company to that point, and also understanding what is the operation, how many days a year does this operation go at a certain level. Just recently, for example, we had a project that we worked on, And as we were kind of going down the line, they have not asked all these questions about the wastewater. We felt early on, and we urged them to start to get some information on the levels of the COBs and BODs, understanding that this can come, later down the road as the roadblock, to close the project. And really, it was actually a really good meeting for us in Holly Springs, because we understood that with the very sustainable practices that this particular company has, the way that they treat their chemicals and the levels that they provided to us, as I at that point, of course, had my experts on the team to kind of get into this discussion, but we were able to, to realize that the company would be able to discharge, and thanks to the high capacity and the unique abilities to treat, in Holly Springs, we would not have the, we would not have to, the company would not have to build a pretreatment plant on site, which, as you can understand, is a significant saving in the capital investment for the companies that are looking to locate on our sites. So really, just as I would echo what Katie has said, that understanding what your product is, or what is this unique ability of your community's treatment plant to treat, what is your system capacity. It's really important to know early on and share that with the clients early on in the process.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, Irina, something you said made me think of this. Some of the times that we've seen challenges around wastewater, the initial project is fine, and the municipality can handle the wastewater for that initial facility with 200 jobs. But then, based on the success of that facility, we've seen a ton of expansions, major expansions of hundreds of jobs with companies that are already in North Carolina. And it could be that, if you haven't sort of thought about what an expansion might look like, you may be able to handle that initial wastewater capacity, but then you run into problems with that expansion and you can no longer handle that wastewater capacity. And then a company who's not used to paying to pre-treat their water is then going to have to expend this additional expense to be able to pre-treat that increased amount of wastewater. And, these companies have sites all over the world, and we want North Carolina to be a competitive place for the expansions of companies that are already here. So, with the Neuse, the Cape Fear, and the Tarpamlico River, all of the allocation has already been given to municipalities. So there isn't more allocation for these municipalities to go get. So again, you really want to be thinking about, can we handle this company now and their current wastewater, but can we also handle an expansion, and maybe a massive expansion, as we've seen with some of these companies, especially, due to the coronavirus pandemic. These companies are growing rapidly if they have any sort of therapeutic or vaccine related to COVID. And I think we're just going to continue to see that growth.
Katie, that's an excellent point. And that's exactly why during the site selection process, those are very critical conversations to have. And I'll have to admit, they're not sometimes the most pleasant one to have, because it does speak the truth of the capacity and possibilities to treat these, but they have to happen. And so you can manage expectations on what can truly happen in your community and how far these companies can go. Of course, building on capacity and always having your team on, understanding that, your engineers, the wastewater, water professionals on your team need to understand industry needs and standards demands as well. So kind of going both ways as the economic development, being in economic development shoes, talking not just to the client and understanding their needs, but also talking to experts in your own community and preparing them for what's coming.
Nice. That's awesome commentary right there, Irina and Katie. A few things stick out to me, and we may circle back towards the end, but exactly what Irina just said, and knowing the experts and the partners you have available across the state, whether it's the Biotech Center, whether it's folks NC State's food processing, it could be a number, but just knowing who to involve in the process. The Katie's of the world and others make a huge difference. Something Katie also said, we'd love to be able to touch on other prominent industries that really, water and wastewater is critical. Certainly food processing is one of those. We just don't have time, but hopefully in the future we can circle around and maybe get industry specific on some of these topics. But again, want to thank Katie and Irina right here for, again, putting some color behind real life projects and certainly highlighting the success in Holly Springs and everything the Biotech Center does across our state. So if you guys can kind of see how the picture's coming together, you kind of get our technical baseline here. We've talked about real life kind of project activity and everything important in the development of product and new sites. And, last but not least, you show me the money, right? So with that, we're going to bring in Melody and John, who we introduced earlier. I think Melody's going to start first. And guys, keep in mind that we couldn't bring on all the funders here. We'll touch on Golden Leaf, USDA, and some other sources, but at least for now, very kind of at the top of your list, you should be thinking certainly commerce and DEQ. And with that, Melody, if you want to grab the mic and talk to us about some funding sources for water and wastewater infrastructure.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Ryan, Emily, and Liz, and the whole NCEDA team. It's great to be with you. This has been a fantastic presentation. I think members will definitely get a lot of benefit, and kind of piggybacking on what the team before has said, planning your project is so important for all of the technical aspects, but also the funding aspects. I'm sure all of you are aware that there just isn't enough money out across all sources to meet the infrastructure need across the state for what we have right now, let alone where we're going. So planning and implementation of solid projects is really, really important going forward. With that being said, Commerce has three main economic development infrastructure programs. The first is the Rural Infrastructure Program. That's the program that my team and I manage, and those are state funds. We get an annual appropriation of about $12 million per year. The majority of those funds don't actually go to infrastructure, though. They go to our Building Reuse Program, which is another very popular program within Commerce. The second of our programs is the IDF Utility Account. That program derives funds from a portion of the JDIG payments that go out to our big recruitment projects. A portion of those payments come back in and are available to grant for infrastructure in other parts of the state. And the amount that comes into that fund is directly related to how many payments go out, but generally I think it's about $8 to $10 million per year. And then our third program is the CDBG ED program. That's a federal program, and of course carries with it those federal requirements, which can be more burdensome than state programs. But at Commerce, we've tried to make that more of a positive in that we will provide larger grants per project to CDBG ED programs. And since we're short on funds, and they get about $10 million a year as well. So you can see all the infrastructure programs at Commerce get about $30 million per year. And since we're short on time, I don't plan to get into all of the details about these programs. They're very, very similar, small nuanced differences. Instead, I'll give you a broad overview of the programs and process to get a good project to Commerce. So typically, Commerce makes grants to local governments, and those grants assist with the construction of public infrastructure. We've heard a lot about water and sewer today. Those are probably the biggest infrastructure projects that we invest in, but we also can invest in non-state maintained roads, natural gas lines, rail, and municipal electric. Those last three elements require a special agreement between a local government and a provider, but we can help with putting those in place. Typical grants at Commerce go to Tier 1 and Tier 2 counties. We do have eligibility in Tier 3, but the majority of our funds actually end up in Tier 1 and Tier 2 counties. Infrastructure projects must support a private business recruitment or expansion that will lead to job creation. And repayment is required if the company fails to create and maintain the required number of jobs. Now, there are a couple of caveats, or a caveat to a couple of those requirements, in that the utility account has some funds that it can offer to projects that will reasonably lead to the creation of new full-time jobs in the future. However, those funds are pretty limited and typically go to, say, an industrial park or a large industrial development that is adjacent to some other key development that's going on. So the funding process to bring a project to Commerce has changed a bit over the recent years. Typically, your project is going to start in your own community with your EDPNC representative. They are out working with your businesses to determine the opportunities for growth, new job creation, or business recruitment. And they're going to pull together a project profile with the help of that business, and also work with a local government to determine the infrastructure needs of the project. And they will put that together into a project profile or a briefing memo and provide that to Commerce. And a team at Commerce will review that project profile and analyze and determine which of our funding programs would be best for the project, based upon the project needs and also the funding availability. And once that is determined, Commerce will issue a proposal that will identify the funding source, the amount, and any requirements for the grant. And from there, the local government can engage with Commerce to submit an application and go through the full application process, where sometimes that might be a pre-application conference call, a site visit once we can get out and about again, and then the submission of a full application. And once that is reviewed by staff, we'll take that to the Rural Infrastructure Authority, who will make all final determinations in terms of awards for our infrastructure programs. And the RIA meets every 2 months. So at Commerce, we're almost always in an application receipt and award phase. So we really think that this process, by starting the projects locally, getting the whole team together and bringing them to Commerce, helps us be able to fund the greatest number of projects without requiring local governments to be sort of sourcing around within Commerce, trying to figure out which is the best program. So that's how you get a project to Commerce, and pretty much ends the portion of my presentation for our infrastructure program specifically. But I thought, considering the group, it might be helpful for me to present this slide, which gives an overview of all the programs available through the Rural Economic Development Division. So I'll leave that there with you, along with the contact information for each of our programs, in case you have additional questions or need additional information. And we look forward to working with you on all of your projects, both infrastructure and others, in the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Melody. I get John tapped in here on a transition. I think he's got a few slides for us from DEQ. And
all right, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Melody. One thing that Melody did not mention is that, in addition to her responsibilities with the Department of Commerce, she also serves as a member of our State Water Infrastructure Authority, which helps, or which the division supports in administering all of the funding programs that we work with. Similar to Melody as well, there's a lot of different programs and just not enough time to go into all of them. So I'll just kind of give you a general feel for the different programs, who's eligible, how much funding we have, and some of the limitations or restrictions with those programs. All of our programs are to fund water and wastewater projects. We don't necessarily prioritize economic development, but I think you'll all agree that having a strong, viable water and wastewater utilities is a great marketing tool to bring to further economic development and bring industries into a community. Eligibility is generally limited to local government units. There are some exceptions for nonprofit and for-profit utilities, depending on the program, but I've got a feeling most of you are most interested in local government units eligibility. We have a number of different ways to fund. The majority of our funds are through loan. We do offer this concept of principal forgiveness, which is not a grant. It's partnered with federal funds, so we call it principal forgiveness, and it helps assure that some of the additional federal requirements do not get added on to that loan if it's a full grant program. We do offer grants as well, and depending on if that's a state grant or a federal grant, there's some additional conditions that go with that grant. Our peer grant programs, Community Development Block Grant Infrastructure, that's for construction type projects only. And we also have something called the Viable Utility Reserve Program, which is a new program. Not actually going to talk much about that, but the idea there is to support those systems that are really struggling to be a viable system and to identify them as they're more at risk or more distressed and provide them some support. I'll go through the different programs kind of in preferential order based on number of requirements that go with the grant or the loan. The first is our state reserve program. We historically have gotten around $10 million of state appropriated funds each year. That's all awarded as grant funds. This can be a mix between water and wastewater construction projects with a cap of $3 million per project, or some study grants, which can be really beneficial in making sure that the community has the information they need to make good decisions and good long-term planning for their systems. The first asset inventory and assessment grant. This is limited to systems that serve less than 10,000 accounts, residential accounts. And the purpose of this is to look at your utility, look at the age and the condition. You can even do mapping of your system with this grant, and just to get information on the condition and what you may need to fix or replace in the future. It really leads in nicely to capital improvement planning, asset management planning, which again is critical to the long-term success of a system. Merger regionalization and feasibility grants, those are available for communities looking to find partner with other communities potentially, or looking for other ways to bring in resources to help their system. Without any of the state reserve program funds, there are no federal requirements, completely state funded. And grant eligibility is based on something we call the affordability criteria. I'm not going to get into that, but again, we're looking at metrics and cost of projects to look at how affordable is that project based on the current conditions of that community. And the more in need they are, the more grant eligibility there would be provided. And we do it in 25% increments, up to 100%. But there are some caps on the total amount that we would make available via grant or principal forgiveness for some of the other programs. Next slide, please. The State Revolving Fund Program, that's another federal funded program. That's where the majority of our funds are. We're able to support between $120 and $130 million within the Clean Water SRF program. That's for wastewater projects, and an additional 90 to 100 million per year in drinking water funds. These are, again, primarily loans, so it's a revolving fund program, and that's why we're able to support so much here. the program has been going on for a number of years, so we have significant amounts of money coming back in repayments that we then immediately make available in the next funding round. Some of the things that make this a really good program for you guys to consider is the interest rates. 1/2 of the market rate. In our most recent award, we were able to commit to no greater than 1.1% interest for a 20-year loan. And that will be reevaluated when they finalize the loan. And we'll look at the market rate again then. And if that's lower than the 1.1, that's the percentage rate that they'll get for that loan. There are some interest rate reduction available as well. And we use that affordability criteria that I talked about previously, where some communities may be eligible for 0% interest or a 1% reduction. I talked about principal forgiveness already. There is a $500,000 cap per applicant for that principal forgiveness. We can go over that if funds are available. It happens on the drinking water program regularly, not so much on the clean water. And then some loan limits that you can see on the slide. Since this is a federal program, there are federal conditions that apply: American Iron and Steel, Davis-Bacon wage rates, and an environmental review process that goes along with these funds. Next slide, please. Finally, our Community Development Block Infrastructure Program. This is the most complicated and has the most restrictions on eligibility. So designed as a community development program, and so there's some additional requirements to assure this. It's $21 to $25 million of grant per year. Again, water and wastewater projects, but this may include new service lines to low to moderate income areas, as well as connections for some homes, again, if it meets the right requirements. This work must be in residential areas, so it's difficult to fund, maybe difficult to fund economic development, and cannot fund infrastructure in business districts. Again, cannot fund infrastructure solely for job creation. That's some of the other CDBG programs that Melody talked about previously. Next slide, please. The eligibility for the CDBGI program, it's focused on low to moderate income population surface areas. And there are 24 entitlement cities. To look, if you go to our website, you can figure out which cities there are, those that are on that list, and they would not be eligible for this program. And again, Melody alluded to this, there's a lot of federal requirements that go with these grant funds, similar to the SRF program, is the Davis-Bacon wage rates, American Iron and Steel, environmental review. But there's additional focus on this comprehensive community development focus. And there's a lot of planning documents and other plans that need to be developed and followed through the course of the project. I'm not going to go over those, but they're listed in the table at the bottom of the slide. Just more things to be thinking about, and that these communities need to commit to if they want to apply for the CDBGI grant. Next slide, please. Our program in general, we try to make it as easy as we can for applicants. So we have one project application for all of our programs. And then in that application, you'll indicate what minimum grant percentages that you need to make the project go forward, whether or not you are interested in taking on a federal grant with the additional conditions. And then we'll do our best when we review that to apply the best money that we can for your project. We do 2 funding rounds per year. The spring round applications are due April 30th. That's generally limited to the SRF and state loans. And then in the fall, all of our funding sources are available. And that would be typically a September 30th application due date. And there are the contact informations for our CDBGI program, Julie Kubetta, and for myself. Thank you.
John, that's great. What I really liked that you and Melody did right there is it really kind of made clear eligibility and process and kind of point of contact to access those resources. So Again, thanks both of you. And I think you had the added benefit of just y'all's prior working relationship, just like Katie and Irina, kind of dynamic duos for each segment here of our webinar today. We've got just a couple of minutes, and Chris Curry and Sarah, I think, asked a question going back to Will about just some cost estimates. Wanted to get clarity on if we could pop that screen up of Will's cost estimates, and then maybe one question was just clarity around the unit of measurement there. If we could pull that back up, and if Will, you could kind of pop back in here. We got just a couple of minutes to go over that.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, and thank you for the question. As I mentioned, with respect to the costs that are shown, these are very rough costs and should be checked based on your specific region of the state, your specific conditions, not only from a scope, but a logistical standpoint. With respect to the inch-foot unit, this is a pretty standard unit within the engineering community, particularly the water resource civil community, in an effort to bring in all of the ancillary costs and features of construction, meaning the material, meaning the select fill, any type of undercut, meaning any type of labor, and all those other additional costs. What this unit does is it tries to bring everything back down to a common denominator, which is the specific inch of utility. I'll use the gravity line as my example, but per the state requirements, the smallest diameter of gravity line that can be used for central collection is 8 inches. And so if you were to take the approximate $30 and multiply it by 8, then you would have roughly about $240 per linear foot of gravity line that's to be installed. Similarly, if you go up in size to say a 24 or a 30, 36 inch line, you would take that same approach and you would do $30 per 30 inches of pipe, meaning diameter, and then multiply that by your approximate linear footage. And again, this is really just meant to give a rough estimate. All of these factors would be broken out into specific costs at the time of bidding and at the time of construction. But from a planning standpoint, this is used to get you in the right ballpark.
Got you. John, or Will, did I hear that right? Down on a linear foot, $240 on the gravity line. That's assuming a certain diameter, right?
Well, that's right. And that's based upon some of the recent trends that we've seen. PVC prices, particularly in the last 6 to 9 months, have escalated extremely quickly. So the same 8-inch pipe that you installed last year would be at least 1.5, if not 2 times more expensive than if you were to install it today.
Got you. And maybe we can drum up some conversion tables for folks out there. I had to listen carefully right there too. Again, last kind of minute here, I did want to turn it back to John. I think he wanted to make a quick plug for his DEQ folks and the appropriate contacts there. So John, you want to chime back in?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Listening to some of the earlier conversation, I love the message of communicating and communicating early with the expertise that are available. But wanted to put a plug in to include the regional office staff from Division of Water Resources, Department of Environmental Quality, especially on the permitting requirements and making sure that the systems that are available have that capacity and have the permits in place, or can even get the permits necessary to serve these industries. I saw it over and over again where they would come to the division late in the game and there just wasn't good solutions available, and it cost people a lot of money and a lot of time. It was really unfortunate.
Yeah, great points right there, John. I see we just hit the 12 o'clock high noon mark. Take a chance. I want to thank all the panelists here. Will, Katie, Irina, Melody, John, just great in sharing your perspective here today. We hope everybody found the discussion beneficial. Obviously, there's a lot more to learn on the topic, and I hope you'll consider today's panelists as resources you can tap when specific opportunities come up. Our thanks again to NCEDA's annual sponsors for their support for professional development programs throughout this year. Again, guys, always be on the lookout for Liz's emails. Additional webinars as part of continuing professional development mission are also on the horizon. We've got, join us next Tuesday, 10 a.m. to learn more about North Carolina's Certified Economic Developer accreditation from East Carolina. And then join us next Wednesday from 1 to 4 for an engaging virtual workshop with senior officials from financial partners with the Appalachian Regional Commission, Golden Leaf, Commerce Finance, USDA, and the US EDA. So this workshop will include 3 segments. During the first hour, attendees will hear overviews of the different grant programs, and the final 2 hours will include some time for small breakout sessions and one-on-one appointments with the funding entities. So this workshop will be a great opportunity for our members to connect with these partners, build relationships with them, and get your questions answered. And to that point, guys, certainly it's a nice segue into that kind of Funders Forum webinar. What you heard today was, you heard from Melody and John on funding, but USDA has quite a few relevant resources for water and wastewater. We'll provide those links. Garland Burnett is typically going to be your best contact at USDA for those sources. We'll get his contact information as well as the fact sheets for those programs. Y'all know the programs that Golden Leaf has, and if you don't, by all means, please register for the webinar. But to close this out, guys, again, don't forget about the virtual spring conference coming up next month on March 17th. The theme is Charting a Path Forward, and it will include updates from our partners and overviews on the state of life sciences, broadband infrastructure, and more. So visit the website, nceda.org, to learn more about these upcoming events, or check your inbox this week for reminders. In the meantime, stay engaged and stay safe. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Y'all have a good one.